Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jay Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I'd like to go over how I'm going to approach handling these filters. So we have this scatter plot chart here that essentially lays out any and all uh, employees, their salary based on experience. And then of course we can come down here and filter these and on and so forth. We can change our trend line. And the one thing that I wanted to do was not every time, not every situation we're going to need gender. So there's going to be times where we don't want to filter by anything. We want to ensure that truly our compensation structure and philosophy is solely based on salary and experience, which would be our R squared here. And in order to do that, we could take this two different approaches. I initially was just going to have this chart fill all the data and then various other charts down below here that would be, by gender, by race, ethnicity, age, whatnot. And then I thought to myself, well, no, let's not take up so much real estate. Let's just do this as a dynamically populated chart based on a drop down. So in this drop down, I know you can't see the drop down because of the way I'm sharing the screen, but um, uh, in this drop down, I have gender, age, race, and veteran. And my idea is I want to be able to take this chart and have it display everything initially and all this to be one color. There's no color here. We'll maybe make it this nice little blue here. And then if an individual or an analyst wants to filter by, say, gender, then it would show this. And then if they did age, it would show that. And race, of course, it would show race. So to do that, we are going to have to go back over here to our code and really do some work. And what I'm going to do is, I haven't tried this before, actually, not with the scatter plot and not in Google Charts. So we're going to give this a go. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come down here to this last piece because I'm essentially just going to write all over this. I'm going to start over. And let's see. We need that, so we'll keep that. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to rewrite this code using a lot of our data, but it's going to be, there's going to be some kind of differences to it. So the first thing I want to look at here is our global variables. So our global variables, we have our options base, which is essentially all of our options, our chart data. But the one thing that we're going to need to add in here is a variable to capture everything. And let's just say store all data globally for filtering. Okay, and then what we're going to need to do is think about when some stuff is going to be essentially initialized. So when we first pull up our sheet, we want the chart to initialize with all the default values. We want it to be just a chart with all of our data and, no filter, no gender, none of that. And in order to ensure that it initializes, those options initialize prior to anything else, we should create a function to make sure that we should initialize it or force it to initialize in the very beginning. So let's create ourselves a function, initialize options base. Because right now we're initializing it way down here after all the data comes in here. But what we're wanting is to fill this data a lot sooner, and also our options a lot sooner. So let's create this function. And this function we'll call initialize. Can't even spell it right. Initialize options. That'll work. And now this initialize options is going to be all of our, where are we? All of our options right here. So let's grab this. Here, so we can just grab it. And then we can come up here to our initialize options and just paste it. Oops. Make sure our squirrely lines are aligned. Okay, good. So there's that. That's not a black border. That is a blue border. I changed the border color to match that little bluish color we have on our spans. Okay, so good. So now we have that. So now we want to run this fetch data and draw chart thing. Now, when we run this, we want to essentially fill all of our data in this data variable right here, this all data. We want to fill it. So we want to do this here in our function draw data chart. So what we can do is we can take this Google script run with success handler, and instead of doing it like this, what we can do is just get rid of this, and then instead of calling a function, so to speak, we are just going to pass this data. And then when this data comes to it, oops, let's do an arrow function. And what we're going to want the function to do is take that all data and fill it with the data that is returned from our Google Apps script side. And we'll store fetched data. And then what we're going to need to do is draw that default chart. So we want to draw the chart with all of our points with no colors. So to do that, we're going to need to do a function, and let's call this function draw filtered chart, because it's going to be defaulted anyway. So we'll just call a function called draw filtered chart. Now this function doesn't exist. We're going to have to create it. Okay. And then what we're going to need to do is, so this happens with the success handler. All of this happens once it comes back from the Google Apps script side. So the Google Apps script side, we just need to run that get salary data again. So really the only thing we changed was we wrote a function inside our data success or our with success handler. That's really all we did. And now we want to process our data. So that's what this will be. process data and prepare for dynamic charting. There we go. Okay, so I'm actually going to change this process. Well, I suppose we can leave it. I suppose we can leave this name. It's just long. So what we're going to do is, first thing this function is going to do, and this is also receiving the data. We need to then grab, because remember this here also attaches to our division and job title. So we need to use our data, and then the first thing that it's going to receive, now it's not this data, it's different data. We are going to grab our all data, because this is our process chart, or a filter chart, excuse me, and we're going to need to store that data again. And this is saving all data globally for filtering. Okay, so we're going to have to, once we fetch the data initially, we're going to go grab all this data and then shove it in our all data. Now this, you'll notice that we're not sharing this process data. I'm actually going to recall this that. There we go. Just process data. So we're not actually calling this function here anymore. This function is something just completely different. And what this is going to handle is all of our filter data. So once that filter data comes over, it's going to give us that filter data, and then we're going to update this little thing right here, this variable. So that's how that's essentially going to work. And now what we need to do after we do this is we need to call this initialized function, or this initialized options function. And this is going to be call, obviously, initialize options. And then we're going to need to call this draw filter chart. Okay, we'll just put call there. And we could have a value in here. We could pass a value to ensure that it's default. But if we leave it blank, it'll be defaulted anyway based on our essentially, we're going to have to write a if statement. We'll probably do a switch statement to check the cases of the drop-down box, that filter drop-down box. And we will just set a default value there. So if there's nothing in here, it will automatically just go to default. Okay, now we're going to need to, let's just close out this function here, because that's really all we want this function to do. Now this is going to be process data function. Just want to comment that out so I can keep control of the squiggly lines. All right, so now we're going to need to draw our filtered chart. So let's create this function here. And this function is going to take all of our data tables. So it's going to take essentially this. Let's make sure everything's set up here. Yep. So it's going to take that. And then we're also going to need to do these. So let's grab this, put these in here, And then, of course, we're going to need our for each, but we're going to have to do something different to this for each because we're not going to take the data anymore. It's going to be something different. But actually, before we do this, trying to think of how this would work in my head, what we're going to need is to do something different with our color. So our color is going to need a map that takes the value of that filter drop down box and then maps it. So right now we have it set up like this. And instead of creating a bunch of variables like row gender is this, row race is that, row age is something else, what we would rather do is just create a color map function to handle all this, sort of like a helper function. And we can call that get color map. And what that color map will do is it'll take the type of filter. So age, veterans, whatever. So hopefully this will make sense once I start actually typing it out. So what we're going to need to do is let's create a variable here. And let's just call this color map. And that color map is going to be equal to another function that we're going to have to create. And that's going to be color map. And this color map is going to take the type of filter. So if it's going to be age, veteran, or whatever, so we can just call this filter type. Okay, now we can initialize all those salaries and expenses. Okay, so let's see, we have that. And now we're going to have to do something different for this for each. Now I'm going to leave this here because I would just like to retype this. And the reason I want to retype it is I want to kind of talk myself through it. So we're not taking the data. We are going to take this all data. So it's going to be all data. And we are going to run a for each on that. And this for each is going to be, we're going to look at every single row. And for every single row, we want to create or grab the filter value. And we should make sure that it is all the same case. So we should put this all to lowercase. So for every row, we are going to want to grab a filter value. And that filter value is going to be, for every row, it's going to grab the filter type and make it to lowercase. So let's just create something like this. Let's create another variable and let's call this filter value. And this filter value is going to be equal to the row. And for every row, we are going to take this filter type and put it to lowercase. This lowercase method essentially takes all the values and just makes all the characters lowercase. Okay, and then what we're going to want to do here is give it an or. So, or it's going to simply be default. And we're going to use this word default quite a bit. We're just calling, if nothing else, if it's told to do absolutely nothing else, it's just going to rely on this string default. Now let's create this color variable. So we have this color variable here, but we don't want to just rewrite all of this. What we can do instead is take the color variable, and what we want this to be equal to is our color map. And the color map is going to be the filter value here. Because what we did is instead of typing all of this out, we just stored it in a variable so we wouldn't have to a massively long line. And it's going to check this filter value. And it's going to have a filter type, and that's going to be in lowercase. Or if it doesn't have a filter type, so if you remember, our data is coming to us as gender colon male, gender colon female, or age, whatever. If it doesn't have, if the filter type doesn't exist, then we want to give it a default color. And the default color is going to be that gray color that we use, that grayish blue color. And that is, I'm going to have it written down here, 3C, 4C, 5C. Okay, so that should be the default color. Now what we can do is come down here. Let's get rid of all of this because we don't need that anymore. It worked if we were not going to do this dynamically. So now what we're going to need to do here is, outside of this for each, we are then going to need to do our chart data. So essentially, all of this. Okay, so this needs to be part of our for each, like that. So now we're going to populate also for every row the chart data, row experience, row salary, because those are the two that we're never going to change. And then the point and the color. Now our color is no longer equal to what that was. It's now equal to this color map of the filter values, which is the filter type. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to be this color. So this color here should be what we start with. Okay, so let's now come down here, and we're going to need to, let's see what else we have here. Oop, we have our calculations. Okay, let me find that. Okay, so there's this. Let me put, so this is the draw filter data. Okay. So now also within this function, not necessarily the for each, but within this draw filtered function, we're going to need to grab all of our calculations as well. So let's come down here, perform our calculations. Yep, let's grab this. Just pull this up here, include it in there. Okay, I'll clean that up. All right, so there's that. And then what we're also going to need to do now is initialize that chart. Make sure we have everything here. Draw filtered chart. We have our table. We have our neat little color thing. Then we're mapping that all out. Then we're doing our calculations for our boxes. And yeah, now what we need to do is just populate that chart. So let's grab this. We need this piece as well. Should just grab that. My apologies. And this legend, we're going to do something different with. So we're going to have to change this legend because we're not always going to have male, female, non-binary. We're going to have all sorts of things in here. So we're not going to include that. But what we are going to have to do is then, after we do this, we're going to need to update the legend. However we're going to create this, it'll be a function, of course, but we're going to have to then update the legend after the chart is drawn. So let's go ahead and call that, well, let's just call it something. Let's just call it what it is. Update legend. And we'll just call it update legend. And this legend, let's try and think about what this legend is going to need. So when we were setting this inner HTML, it was needing this color. So what we're going to have to do is pass not the color through here, but we're going to need to pass the color map. Yep, color map. This. Because that's what it's running, this function right here. And we still have to create this function, but that's what it's running. So we need to call the color map. Now, if you've caught on, this is essentially a chain of functions. So in order to complete a lot of these things, like in order for this variable to be filled, it's got to run this color map. So we must call this prior to updating our legend. And anytime that we update something dynamically, especially a chart, the order of operations becomes imperative. You have to get it down pat. You have to ensure that nothing is being called before it is either declared, loaded, or even available. Okay, so let's now look at that. That should be it for that. So let's now create this function, colored map. So, or this get color map, I should say. Get color map. So this color map is going to take the filter type, just like it is up here. And what's going to end up happening, what it's going to do with that filter type is it's going to essentially map everything. And what it's going to map is the gender to the male, female, non-binary, and color. To the color, like veteran status will be veteran, we'll make it green, non-veteran will be gray. And then all of our race ethnicities and our, yeah, that should be it. Oh, and our age. Yep, we'll have to do our age. So we're going to have to put this all into a variable. Let's call this variable, let's call this variable maps, I guess. And this maps is going to be equal to an object. And I'm not going to have y'all sit here and watch me type out every single situation for that. So I'm going to pause the video here and then just get to typing. So see you in just a second. Okay, so I went and typed in all this, and we have essentially gender type, race, age, and veteran status. Now, these veteran status and this age and all that is essentially the value within our drop-down box. So if the value is race, then what it's going to do is it's going to take that all data and then map it based on this for each. And the default is going to be not gray. I don't know why I keep wanting to type gray in here. Let's just do light blue. I keep thinking I just want this to be gray as a default, but nah, we're just going to change it to 3C, 4C. It'll look better. Okay, so this is now our get color map. And what we're going to need to do when we get out of this and we find out, once we map everything here, we're going to need to return something. So we're going to return that variable maps, which is this right here, with, not curly brackets, square brackets, with the filter type, or that filter type doesn't exist, we're going to return maps and this right here, default. Okay, so now that there should take care of our get color maps function, color map function. Now, more than likely, we will have some typos here, so we'll have to take care of that. The one thing that we're going to have to now take care of is this function right here. So let's grab this and let's create this function here real quick. Update color map, update legend, and this legend is essentially going to take a little bit of this. So it should take this fine. So this should stay the same. But what's going to happen is we're actually not going to be using this legend container in our HTML. Well, we are, but it's not going to be this. What we're going to have to do is use our object constructor and essentially assign the color map, and those keys, and then write some HTML. So it's going to look similar to this, just not quite. So let's just create a clean variable here, and let's just call this legend HTML. Now this legend HTML, we are going to need to construct an object key, and what we're going to pass through that is our color map that's coming over to us. And that color map, we are going to map each key. And for each key, what we're going to do is we are going to give it some HTML here. So let me bring this up here closer. So what we're going to do is do our back tags here. And then inside our back tags, our back hashes here, we're going to do a div and then the span. So this thing right here, and then our style color for that span is going to equal the color. And then that color isn't going to be this blue, green, red because we're now doing it dynamically. So in our literal, we can call our color map for every key. This. And then that should be the end quotation. And then we're going to need, this little thing right here is what we'll need. Make sure this is closed out. Yep, that'll close that out. And then what we're going to need is that key, this male, female, non-binary, veteran, non-veteran, or demographic data. So we can simply pass another literal here, and that literal is going to be the key. Now this is going to come to us, I'm trying to think of how this is going to come to us. This is going to come to us as multi-dimensional. So what we're going to have to do is join this to flatten it out. So let's, at the very end of this, we can use the join method to flatten it out, and we'll just put empty quotations in here to take care of it all, and that should make it look like this. Of course, we haven't used our class. We just did this part, but instead of it being now a full object piece, it's now just flat like this. Okay, good. Now what we can do is take this legend container thing, and instead of this, it's going to be this legend HTML. Oh, legend HTML. Okay, let's get rid of this so I don't keep confusing myself. Okay, good. So that should take care of that. So now what I'm thinking is we just need to make sure that our, get rid of this because we're almost done. Ensure our set on call load back works. Now, the one thing that we're going to have to do is, yes, we're going to have to call this, but we're also going to have to call that initialize options thing up here. This. So what we can do is we can come down here, and instead of doing it like this, what we can do instead is make an empty. Let me just get rid of this because I'm going to really screw myself up with all those curly brackets. Okay, so let's get rid of this. We're going to need two, just like we did up here in our fetch and draw chart. And we'll leave this initial one blank, but then we're going to need to run a callback function. That callback function is essentially going to be initialize options. It's going to be this initialize options function. And then it's going to be the fetch and draw chart function. Okay, good. Now what we need to do is ensure that the body is on load. But now what we need to do is ensure that our process data is triggered. So let's grab this because we changed this. So we need to come down here, and every place that we called that, this Google script one on our comp division filter and our comp job filter, we need to change that. Change that. Okay, we'll save it just to make sure. And now what we're going to need to do is come down here after everything is loaded. We are going to need to call our chart to essentially initialize it, along with that filter. So we need to ensure that the filter is ready to go. So what we can do is use this DOM const load, and let's just add on to it. We'll say that this is loading the filter and the chart. So let's create a variable here to store the filter dropdown, and the filter dropdown is the ID of, where is it here? Where is it? Where is it? Right here. It's the ID of that. So let's just call it, well, let's just call it filter dropdown, I guess. And this will be equal to the document get element by ID, and it's going to be filter dropdown. And what we're going to need to do is add an event listener. And we want to make sure that the filter dropdown is loaded prior to it actually running. So what we can do is run a simple if statement, and if filter dropdown, and what we're wanting to check is if it's even there. So if this returns true, which means if it's there, it's going to return true. We're not really checking any condition. If it's true, we are going to take that filter drop down and add an event listener. And that event listener is going to be a change. And we'll just, not a 3, an E for an event. And when it recognizes a change, it is then going to run a function. And that function is going to be, well, it's going to need to get the value of whatever's in that drop-down box. So let's create another variable here. We'll call this selected filter. And this filter is going to be equal to E, that event, target. Now we got the ID prior, but we don't want the ID. We want the actual value of that thing. And this is going to be selected value. And then what we're going to do with this is we need to draw the data or draw the chart based on this. So let's come up here and look at the name of our function that actually draws the data. So this is the process data. This is just shoving everything up in there. So it's this right here. This is what we're going to need to run. And what we're going to pass through here is this selected filter. And then let's give ourselves an else. And just in case none of this is loaded, or I'm worried that we're going to be firing this before this is even built in or populated. I know it's running here ahead of this, but this may fire before that finishes. So just to make sure, let's give ourselves a alert. Let's do a console log so we can pull it up in real time here. And that console log is going to be dd element not found. So then if this doesn't work, we can come up here and actually see where it's happening. Okay, so let's save this. And let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. Okay, so let's refresh this. See if we made any typos or got any errors. Okay, so it's populating fine. Let's see if the chart populates. Okay, the chart's not populating, so let me pull up F12 and see what happens here. Okay, filter type is not defined. Filter type is not defined. Okay, so let's go over here and find out why the filter type is not defined. Control F. Okay, so our filter type is here. Okay, so we're calling it here. We're passing that, passing it there. Huh, interesting. Okay, so let's go through this and see if we made a typo. Filter type, filtered, filter type. See if that made any difference. Okay, we'll refresh it. Okay. Okay, good. Oh, yep, that did it. So we now have a chart that's populated with everything, and it's this blue color, so that's good. So it's defaulted. And if we hit gender, there we go. Good. Gender, and our legend pops up. And if we can do this, okay, good. It takes it back to default. Okay, that doesn't clear, so I'll have to fix that. So, okay, good. So it's functional. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to end our video, and I'm going to, the next video, what I'll do is we'll go back and clean this up, but I really want to go back through our code. I know that was a lot, and you just kind of sat there and watched me ramble as I was trying to put thoughts in my head and whatnot. But the next video, I'll go through line by line and kind of explain what's happening and why it's happening. And then we'll take care of this filter by uh, drop down box here clearing. So I hope this was informative, and we'll continue to build onto this and fine tune it the next video. And until next time, please take care.